The calendar read September 16th, 2011. That night, inside a small bar in Los Angeles, a young and cocky guitarist looked at Carlos Santana sitting in the corner booth and said, "We're not your students, old man." One of the most embarrassing sentences in the history of rock music. Santana had only offered one piece of advice, a single sustained tip, and the kid dismissed it as an old-timer rambling about nothing. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, but something unforgettable was about to happen. Carlos Santana didn't raise his voice. He just stood up and started walking toward the stage. The day had started quietly enough. Carlos had finished his concert at the Hollywood Bowl that evening, said his goodbyes backstage. 12,000 people on their feet. He was used to that. But even 12,000 voices couldn't always fill the silence inside a man. He flagged down a cab and gave the driver one address, a bar tucked behind Sunset, the kind of place tourists would never find. A friend of 40 years was waiting. The cab rounded the bend and Carlos's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, slid his glasses to the tip of his nose, and squinted at the screen. Eddie Van Halen. But it wasn't an ordinary smile. A message like this had never come before. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked out the window. That reply could wait, for now. John Delgado's bar didn't promise anything from the outside. Peeling paint on the door, a faded Live Music Fridays flyer on the window, a motorcycle leaning on the curb. Inside, time slowed down. Yellowed concert posters, chairs that had survived more arguments than most marriages, dusty crates of vinyl records on a corner shelf. John had opened this place in 1979. The whole room smelled of stale beer and old tube amps. And if you'd grown up in places like this, that smell was home. Carlos walked in and found John behind the counter. The back panel of an old tube amp pried open, soldering iron in hand. His fingers were stained with oil and years of solder burns. John didn't throw broken things away. He fixed them. He saw Carlos, looked up, and gave a slow nod. No words. 40 years in one gesture, heavier than 1,000 sentences. Carlos nodded back and settled into his usual corner booth. Nobody recognized him on the way. John didn't ask what he wanted, already knew. He set the bottle on the table and Carlos's eyes drifted to the stage. A young band was setting up, unaware of what was coming. 4 kids, early 20s, hair gel shining under the light, brand new white sneakers without a scuff, t-shirts with prints that hadn't survived a single wash. The pedal board at the front of the stage looked like a space station. Touchscreen effects, plastic boxes, blinking blue LEDs. Carlos took a sip. John leaned against his shoulder, looked at the stage. "They come every Friday," he said quietly. "Good kids, hard workers." Carlos nodded. The amber tint of his glasses cast a warm shadow across his face. His phone buzzed again. Second message from Eddie. Carlos read it with a thoughtful expression, then placed the phone face down on the table. The band kicked into their first song. The guitarist, a kid named Bryce, blonde hair, full of confidence, hit the opening chord, and Carlos's ear caught it instantly. The sound was clean. Too clean. Digitally processed, compressed, polished, as if someone had run the guitar's soul through a filter and left only the technical shell behind. But something was there. The way Bryce's left hand sat on the fretboard, the way his fingers moved. Raw talent was hiding underneath. Something stirred beneath those fingers, but the kid hadn't found it yet. Carlos narrowed his eyes. His head swayed slightly. If you knew him, you knew what that meant. He rested his calloused fingers on his knee and followed the rhythm in silence. John recognized the look from behind the bar. He'd seen it maybe 10 times in 40 years. The band played 3 songs. Bryce was fast. His fingers sprinted across the fretboard but didn't know where they were running. Too many notes, too much speed, like a politician trying to say everything and saying nothing. His solos were technically flawless, emotionally empty. Carlos knew the feeling. He'd made the same mistake when he was young. Bryce leaned into the mic after the last song. "Thanks, everybody. Did you guys like it?" Thin applause. 20 people, maybe 25. Carlos clapped, too. Quietly, but he clapped. Bryce was cracking open a water bottle when Carlos rose from his booth. Slow, unhurried, took a few steps toward the stage. Bryce looked up and saw an older man in a flat black hat, a mustard yellow linen shirt, bracelets on his wrists. It was the kind of shirt that had been washed 1,000 times, soft, reliable, and better with age, just like the man wearing it. That was good, Carlos said, slow, thoughtful, weighing every word. Especially the bridge in your second song. Beautiful melody there. Bryce hadn't expected that. Thanks, he said. Carlos paused, took a deep breath. He always did that, the quiet moment before thought became words. Maybe, he said gently, if you held that last note in the bridge a little longer, gave it some sustain, it'd hit even harder. Bryce's smile froze. Something shifted behind the polite mask. A white AirPod still sat in one ear, a small digital wall built against the world and everything it had to teach. He hadn't taken it out while Carlos was talking. Thanks, Pops, Bryce said. Polite on the surface, but underneath ran a current. Patronizing, dismissive, a tone that said, your time is up. We've already found our sound. Carlos's face didn't change, but John froze behind the bar, set the soldering iron down, clenched his jaw. He'd heard his friend of 40 years called Pops, and something caught fire inside. But he didn't speak. Not yet. Carlos didn't flinch, looked at the kid, not with judgment, but something close to compassion. Took another breath. I understand. Your sound is good. Would you mind if I played one song with you? Sometimes hearing is easier than explaining. Bryce glanced at his bandmates. The bassist shrugged. The drummer didn't look up from his phone. Bryce smiled. Not a real smile. But that wasn't the only problem. He didn't look Carlos in the eye. His gaze traveled across Carlos's hat, shirt, bracelets, trying to classify and coming up empty. What he couldn't classify, he didn't take seriously. We're not your students, old man, Bryce said. No pretense of politeness left. We make our own music. What we need isn't advice. Heads turned. A woman set her glass down, a familiar sting in his eyes. The gray-haired man at the end of the bar put his bottle down hard. That word hadn't been aimed at Carlos alone. It had been aimed at every man in that bar who'd earned a few lines on his face. Carlos said nothing, walked back to his booth, sat down, took a sip. John came around the bar, wiped his hands on his apron, walked toward the stage. But there was no anger on his face. He was laughing, quiet, deep from somewhere in the bottom of his lungs. Bryce, hold on a second. What's up, John? That man's been my friend for 40 years. Steel under the calm. He wants to play one song, 3 minutes. What's it gonna hurt? Bryce looked at his bandmates. Same shrug. Same phone. Fine, come on, old-timer. He waved at the stage, more like granting a favor than an invitation. One song. Carlos stood. The silver peace pendant on his chest swung gently. He walked toward the stage, slow, steady, every step planted with intention. John went back behind the bar, pushed the soldering iron aside, closed the amp panel, crossed his arms, and waited. On the way to the stage, Carlos reached toward the corner shelf, touched one of the dusty record crates with his fingertips. There might have been a Santana record in there, but we don't know yet. Then he stepped up. Bryce's guitar sat in its stand. Carlos looked at it first, tilted his head, the way a craftsman examines a tool. Then he picked it up, gave Bryce a small nod, felt its weight. He held it not like a weapon, but like an old friend he hadn't seen in years. The only scratch was fresh. It still smelled like factory plastic. This guitar didn't have a story yet. Bryce leaned against the edge of the stage, arms crossed, foot tapping. He wanted this over. Carlos walked past the pedal board without a glance, past the touchscreens, the LEDs, the plastic, straight to the tube amp. One cable, guitar to amp. The tubes hummed as they warmed, and that smell filled the room. Hot glass, melting solder, and the scent of 1970s studios where sweat and substance were all that mattered. When the tubes hit saturation, that warm tone washed through the room. Carlos reached for the single potentiometer, turned the tone knob a quarter turn, No menus, one knob and one ear. That was it. Then he hit the first note. Bryce's song. Same chords, same structure, same bridge. But something else entirely. At the bridge, Carlos held the note, didn't let go. It stretched, breathed, trembled, still alive under his fingertip. That's what sustain is. Not just ringing. It's holding on to someone's hand and refusing to let go. His finger stayed on the string, and the vibrato started, unsteady, alive, like a heartbeat. Bryce's arms dropped. His eyes widened, hearing his own song like it was the first time. That note had never sounded like that in his hands. A woman set her glass down, fingers still on the stem. The old man in the corner put his glasses on. John stood motionless behind the bar, arms at his sides. Carlos closed his eyes. His body moved with the music. A subtle sway. The quiet man was gone. Someone else stood there now. The guitar wasn't separate from him. And here's the thing. He hadn't touched Bryce's pedalboard once. Same guitar, same strings, same amp. But the sound belonged to another world. The only difference was 40 years inside those calloused fingers. Then Carlos stopped. Silence. Everyone held their breath. He played one note. Just one. Nothing else. Inside that note was everything. The tone was a human voice. The sustain was a farewell. The vibrato was a trembling that words couldn't carry. A note that refused to fade away, like a memory from 1969 and the sacred mud of Woodstock. It cut through everything. The filters, the pedals, the space station, the noise. One man, one guitar, one note. When it faded, the bar was so quiet you could hear the tubes humming. Carlos didn't let it die. His finger held the string, the vibrato slowing, the note hanging suspended, then dissolving gently like a candle flame going out. He eased into samba partie. The bar transformed. This wasn't a Friday night gig anymore. When that melody started, the whisper that needs no words, time didn't stop. For the first time, it started flowing right. It reached inside everyone and found something buried, a man's first love, a phone number no one calls anymore, the moment behind John's eyes, opening night, 40 years back, standing next to a friend no longer with us. Carlos touched that guitar the way a father holds a child, the way a man touches his father's old watch every morning. Not ownership, reverence, memory, gratitude. Samba partie ended. The last note hung in the air. For a few seconds the world stood still. Silence. Carlos opened his eyes, pulled his hand from the neck, touched the strings one last time, like goodbye, bent down, reached for the tone knob on Bryce's guitar and turned it a quarter inch. A millimetric touch. Mastery doesn't live in grand gestures. It lives in adjustments exactly this small. The setting Carlos left behind was the warm tone Bryce wouldn't have found in a year of searching. He set the guitar back, stepped down, walked to his booth. Nobody clapped. They didn't know how. They hadn't figured out what they'd just seen. Bryce stood at the stage edge, lips parted, hands at his sides. The bassist had pocketed his phone, first time all night. The drummer had set his sticks down quietly. John came out from behind the bar, that knowing smile on his face. He walked to Bryce, leaned in, and whispered. Bryce's lips moved, but no sound came. His hands hung loose, like his body wasn't his anymore. He turned toward the corner booth. Carlos sat there, finishing his last sip. "No," Bryce said, barely a whisper. "That can't be him." John laughed. "Come on," he said, and walked Bryce to the table. Bryce could barely stand. I didn't know." Carlos looked at him. Calm. No anger, no arrogance, no victory. Just those eyes. Warm, deep, patient. "Look, son," Carlos said, slow, deliberate. "Your fingers work fine, but your heart's still in the guitar case. One breath. Take it out, then you'll really start playing." Bryce cleared his throat and looked away. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Carlos stood up, pulled a few bills from his pocket. Didn't crumple, didn't fold. Place them under the glass with care. A tip that said, "I remember when things were hard," without saying a word. The kind of amount John would never make change for. That's how 40-year friendships kept their books. He looked at John. John looked back. The nod. John was the guardian of this bar, the patron saint of everyone in it. And tonight, he'd serve justice without raising his voice. Carlos walked to the door. Real power doesn't announce itself. He'd sat in this bar unrecognized, watched everything without ego. The hour he'd spent here weighed more than 12,000 people cheering. He stepped outside, typed a reply to Eddie. "I'm heading to the studio. Let's make that record." Smiled. The chain between masters never breaks. It just changes hands. He flagged a cab. "Studio City," he said. "Coldwater Canyon." Eddie was waiting. They'd record something the world hadn't heard yet. As the cab pulled away, Carlos looked back. The faded sign, the peeling paint, the motorcycle on the curb, all of it shrinking. In a few minutes, he'd be in Eddie Van Halen's studio. But tonight, the place where music mattered most was that little bar behind Sunset. The days rolled on. Bryce didn't get famous, didn't sign a deal, didn't tour. He still played John's bar every Friday. Same stage, same pedal board, same LEDs. But life had different plans. Not the big kind, the small, deep kind. Here's what changed. Whenever someone criticized him now, a listener, a fellow musician, even John, Bryce didn't get defensive. He'd take out the AirPod, make eye contact, and say 2 words, "Thank you," until someone mentioned sustain. Then he'd smile, a smile that held both ache and gratitude. And every night before the first song, when he tuned his guitar and tested the opening note, he heard it, that single note, the one that had cut through every filter, every pedal, every LED like a blade through smoke. The weight a 63-year-old man had left on one string. Bryce never saw Carlos Santana again, but every time he held a note longer, every time he refused to let it fade, Carlos was right there on that small stage with him. Still, some lessons don't fit in a notebook. We'll say goodbye to you in just a moment with a word from Carlos Santana himself. But first, we want to say something. On this channel, we make videos to pass on the beautiful things that have flowed through Carlos Santana's heart to future generations. You can support us by subscribing to our channel and liking our videos. Let's close with this unforgettable word from Carlos Santana. If you're not listening, you're not playing music. You're just making noise.